welcome. Um, so, um, so I see that some of you are here and probably know all that I'm going to show by heart. So I don't know why you're here, but anyway, so we'll just have some fun. Um, so, I just wanted to start by saying that whenever I do, and so we're supposed to be talking about film editing, and whenever I do an editing workshop, most usually I've realized that I'm usually not talking about techniques of hands-on, like editing, Final Cut, do this, do that kind of stuff, and mostly talking about structuring. So in fact, a lot of the workshop or coaching or mentoring things that I've been doing in the last few years, whenever it's about editing, it also involves a lot of sometimes script doctoring, if it's in fiction, or trying to find a structure with the film director if it's in a documentary, before even that he or she goes into the editing room. So I'm going to be talking mainly about documentary editing, but mostly it won't be talking, it will be show and tell. So I will be showing a lot of clips and then saying why I did this and why I did that in different situations in documentaries, and quite often I'll show some things in fiction as well, because I really want to emphasize that the boundary between documentary and fiction nowadays, very thin. So I come from fiction. I come from having edited Eric Romer's films for 30 years, and then all of a sudden I got dropped into the documentary pool. And when I started to do documentary editing, it wasn't because I was an expert in documentary editing. It was simply because someone was looking for an editor who speaks Chinese in Paris. So, so it turns out that the technique that I use in storytelling in fiction then helped a lot in structuring the stories in documentary. And of course, the funny thing now is that I'm asked a lot to do complicated documentaries with a lot of footage, with references to works like Last Train Home, when people who would reference that work sometimes don't even know who Eric Romer is, and vice versa, that the fictional world, they can't imagine why I'm editing documentaries. And there's something else that I wanted to say in the beginning is, when I was starting out to do documentary, when I was starting to edit documentaries, I think before that I actually was already interested in documentaries. But for a long time, the documentary world and the fiction world were very separate, at least in France, in terms of that it's almost like there's some sort of it's like some sort of mistrust between the two worlds. It's like they would never imagine hiring me to edit a documentaries, because there was fiction editor, don't know how to edit a documentary. And the other way around as well, there are some who only edit fiction films and just, documentaries, television, like that kind of thing. But as I said, now more and more. There's more and more mixing, and I think that one of the things that I was very, very pleased about, because you were mentioning Golden Horse and Anne's film and so on, and that Golden Horse was best editing was won by a documentary this year, so Plastic China, which with of course our friend Jean, which is something that I was very happy about, because it's really a high time that I mean it's always been, there has been cases that documentaries win big awards across the board, that is not, you know, it's not in documentaries film festivals only, but it's really time that it's on the same footing. Okay, maybe we look at some things. And I'd like to emphasize the fact that this is like a discussion. So I just want to show you things that I've been doing. And I think I would really welcome everybody to just ask questions while we get along, you know, like if you're seeing something, you say, why did you do this, and what would have been the alternative, or something like that. Or to ask me to repeat something in Chinese, for example. Okay. So a background and all this, okay, I've got this. Let's just get into, I'll get back into some things that are like more fun, like Eric Romer films and stuff. But for now, let's get into some things that I like doing most. I'm always trying to, in fact, when I started getting into documentaries, there are of course many kinds of documentaries, and I'm interested in the kinds that are not just, but I've done, I mean, not just talking heads, in the sense that I started to be interested in documentaries because I realized that it could be many different forms of storytelling. And when I said that I come from fiction, it's not entirely true, because I grew up in Canada, and I went to Concordia, which when we were doing, it wasn't even film studies, it was communication arts. And we started by studying experimental films, like Maya Deren and Stan Brakhage and so on. And so a lot of the solutions that I'm looking for, that I find when I'm editing a documentary, at first instinctively comes from experimental films, which may be a little bit odd. So it is actually a good thing that I was not trained in traditional documentary film structures. So when people talk to me about, like, you know, even recently, especially in big institutions, when they talk to me about 3-act structures, sometimes it's very bewildering, because in fact, the fact that I didn't come from a film school, that I came from communication arts, even in fiction, I don't know what a 3-act structure is supposed to mean. So I think just thinking about that, you know, so somebody throws it out like that, 3-act structure, you know, in the first act I do this, in the second act I do this, in the third act I do this. It's already something really scary, you know. Why do you put yourself in a box? You know, why don't you see how it flows? You know, what the story needs, how it needs to be told, before you put yourself in a box. I think in that way, perhaps I was influenced by my master, Eric Romer, who didn't believe in film schools. He just thought that you would all be just much more formatted coming out of any kind of structured programs like that than if you just go out and look at films and make films, which in a way, of course I agree with him, but maybe today maybe we need some technique. So when I maybe come back to him first, because one of the first things that I try to do when I'm editing a story, and documentaries are always stories, is that I still remember what I learned from him, which is the first thing is being clear, is to be clarity, to not, quite often, like even today when we were doing workshop, part of the workshop today was like, how do we make this whole big thing into something that's a clear, something that's clear for the audience? Maybe not necessarily I don't mean that there has to be a linear storyline, but but you shouldn't be going all over the place. It shouldn't be confusing. It should be trying to be clear. And the second thing that I try to go by is I would sort of edit a scene, or I have a first cut of a scene by somebody, by my assistant or somebody who's been doing the assembly or something. And quite often I would then redo the scene, and maybe redo it again to try to find a way to tell the story, tell the scene by making it less flat. And that is often by, again, throwing out whatever they taught us in film school in terms of, starting with a establishing shot, and then you go into a whatever, and then you go into a close-up, and then you show the object that the person is picking up, and stuff like that. And so, once that is, if somebody has set up the scene like that, I try to find another way to do it, and so that it could be surprising, to surprise the audience, but at the end to always give them something that is clear. And I think that the last thing that then I would arrive at is having a rhythm that is something that is more flowing. When I say flowing, it doesn't necessarily mean that you don't use jump cuts, but even jump cuts can be something that is harmonious, and that is, I like to think about it in the French as being elegant, but elegant has a connotation of, something snobbish, but it's not. It's just a sort of a flowing sort of a rhythm. So let me start by some sort of my favorite tricks or favorite techniques or something like that. I'm one of those people who I always say to my directors that I have to find the beginning. First of all, I'd like to talk about there are different methods for different editors. And the way that I do things is that I'd like to discuss the project in documentaries, especially. I would discuss the project with the director. They would tell me what they want, tell me what they think is the story, and what they want to tell, and maybe an assembly by somebody, and then they would give me a selection of what they like or what they have selected. But I would ask to have all the rushes available. And then, then I would ask them to leave me alone for a few months. And then I would come back with a cut, and then we start discussing again, and then we start to really work together. But to have that first cut, the assembly, the selection that I asked for, is actually something that is not necessarily something that I would use to guide me, but it's a very interesting and important tool for me, because the directors would have selected what he thinks or she thinks is important, and by that, sometimes I just go into the rushes and look at what's behind it, what's in front, what's near the place that they selected. For the simple reason that sometimes I'm looking for what the director did not select, because there are a lot of, I find that for some strange reason, directors are quite often censoring themselves. And that what they think is not interesting, it's always sometimes for the wrong reasons, because they're thinking, especially, I hear this all the time in documentaries, but that shot is out of focus, or that shot is not in focus enough, but it really doesn't matter, and if it's strong and emotional and it's full of the whatever that I need, if it goes out of focus for a split second, it really doesn't matter. And sometimes they would censor themselves for other reasons. So I always ask for the rushes to be there, but then I would go with the selection, and then I would go into the rushes to see what is around that selection. So it's like spying. It's like a sort of a detective work. So for me, I always need to then find a beginning. I need to find a beginning before the rest of the film would come into place. And sometimes it's very scary for the production, because sometimes it would take me weeks before I can find the beginning for, I'm talking about documentaries, for documentary storytelling. And during that time, they don't know what the hell I've been doing, at home with all the rushes. It's a very mysterious process, but sometimes it would just come like that. It would just happen. And so to help me, I have one trick. One of the things that I find that helps me a lot is to find a prologue. Joy. It's practically helped me every time, and that's when I find my prologue, I find my film. And this prologue, sometimes it has nothing to do with the storyline. It has nothing to do. It's not a trailer. It's not something that sums up the film. It can be something that has nothing to do with the meat of the film. But it may announce a certain mood, a certain color. And then I realized some years ago, I met this very talented young woman in Canada she told me that her job, one of her work, she's an artist, one of her work was to, I forgot what it's called, but it's like you have this theater presentation, for example, or a major film presentation, and they would, the distributor or whatever, would hire her to set up or to decorate or set up or use smell, scent, or whatever it is, in the foyer before going into the performance. This is to set up the mood of the film or the performance that you're about to see. And the prologue for me is something like that. It's something that gives the audience a key to go into the story, what I'm about to tell them. So maybe we can start with that. Then it'll be easier to tell you what I'm about. So how about, well, okay. Let's, okay, let's start with, okay, I'm sure that just some of you have seen, like, these clips many times. So I always start the prologue thing with a clip from Du Bing's film, Umbrella. And I'll tell the story behind that, because Umbrella was a film that, since then we've collaborated on 3 or 4 other films together. But Umbrella was a film that went into competition in Venice in the Orizzonti section. And what happened was that he was editing the film practically to the day of the screening in Venice. So the version that he screened in Venice, nobody had seen. And that when it was actually screened, Marco Miller and Marie-Pierre had me called up and said, oh, well, you need to recut this film because it just doesn't work structurally. And at that time, I had started to work with Chinese independent filmmakers and directors, and I had some negative experiences, so I decided not to work anymore with Chinese directors. So my only condition was that I would agree to do that, but he could not come into the editing room. And so one day that I was in Beijing in this room, and then this young man came in with a box because I asked for some more rushes. It was this box that it was still cassettes, and he said to me, "Oh, you're scared that I would stay here, right?" I said, "Yes, you're not allowed here. Just go away." And but in fact, I already had an idea that I had something that I wanted to try, and I wanted to show him afterwards. And I was afraid that he would reject it. So the story is about, I don't know whether you've seen it, San. It's about the 5 classes in Chinese society: industry, education, military, commerce, and agriculture. And basically, the idea is that the agriculture comes at the very end. The film was very long, it was 2 hours. Agriculture comes at the very end. Basically, the idea is that in China, the rural, the agricultural community can't live by the land anymore. So they have to find some other means of survival. Land people are just not sustainable. So by the time you get to the land part, by the time you get to the agriculture part, it's 2 hours later, and the whole audience has fallen asleep. So nobody knows, and so what I wanted to do was to, before the beginning of the film, to give a hint of where we're going, like 2 hours later. And in fact, later on, the film was cut down to 1.5 hours. So I did a prologue for him, which he liked very much, and I hope that this is going to work. This second one that I want to show you is, again, a documentary from Hong Kong. In fact, it's Xiaobang Wang. It's called Fish Story. You might have seen it already. And it was actually during a Cinex workshop. And the rough cut that he brought in was about 2 boys fighting with each other. I don't know how to say in English, in a tongfang kind of situation. Like one of the boys lives in this tiny little room that has everything in it. Very poor kind of situation, and I thought that first of all we narrowed it down to I thought that the central character is one boy, is not the two boys, because it got very confusing. Who are we talking? What kind of story we are telling? So basically, I narrowed it down to the one boy, and then I was trying to find a prologue. And in the middle of the film, there was one sequence, and quite often that I find that there are always miracles like this in terms of documentaries. You just have to be very patient to look at all the material, and there's always some part that there's nothing that was not used in the way that later on that we use it. It was in the middle of a film. There was a competition, school competition, and a poetry recital kind of competition. And this boy won the competition by reciting a poem about planting seeds. And Xiaobao followed him to the competition, which is somewhere in Jimsajoi, beside the harbor. And so he filmed the boy talking about that, like, reciting that in front of the harbor. And when I saw that in the middle of the film, I thought, well, this is our beginning. This is because it's exactly what they're talking about. Like, we want to talk about education, Hong Kong, and planting seeds in little kids and that kind of thing. The other consideration was that I thought Tongfang is something that is very typically Hong Kong, and that it's a terrible situation in a city that outside, because one of the things is that I'm always looking again from the outside to, for example, to a situation in Hong Kong where I was born, but I always also have the point of view of a foreigner almost. So the thing is that do we know that we have this situation in Hong Kong? If I was just coming from, Toronto or something, and how do you situate this in the contrast of having something that we used to think of as Hong Kong, very prosperous and all that? So that's why I decided to start the film this way. So finally, this I still think that is like wonderful that the way that he recites that poem. It turns out like it's just completely by coincidence that he was reciting a poem like that, which is exactly the theme of the film. So I think that I've encountered this kind of situations many times. It's this kind of coincidences, and I always think of documentaries, or the making of documentaries when it comes together, is sort of very miraculous. There's always something that's a miracle that is falling, and then the whole thing of going from the city into his little place, which was something that I really wanted to do. Now, I'll show you, I get very much into prologue, so I'll show you a lot of prologues. I'll show you another prologue, and which is another Hong Kong film, which is something that I like very much as well. Flowing Stories. I don't know how many of you have seen that. It's Ho Xiang Bin Chun. It's filmed by Zhang Choi San, Jesse Zhang. And it was, and so I'll talk about how that structure of that is very, very complex. Because Jiang San made a fiction film some years ago called Big Blue Lake, and it was about her native village in Saigon, and where she was born and where she still lives. And in that fiction film, that story film, the very last scene has a village festival in it that happens once every 10 years. And so she shot a lot of footage during that village festivals. In fact, that village, the people have gone out, immigrated out to Canada, to England, France, and so on. And everybody comes back. It's the United Nations in this little village during that time of the Qingjiu. And so she shot a lot of footage during that, and that she wanted to make a documentary about that. And at that time, we didn't even have the characters. And then she thought, inside this footage, there's one family that the children had all gone out to open restaurants and so on in France, in Scotland, in England. And she followed these children out to Europe. She got a grant and she followed them out and filmed them in their different places. And as well as their mother, who stayed in the village. And when I saw the footage, now again, as a foreigner or as a European from Hong Kong, I was looking at the footage of for example, the family who had immigrated to France or to England. And what I was afraid of is that this is a rather cliched story of something that we see on reports quite often on French television in late night news or something. You know, they will run a little story about especially at Chinese New Year time, about a Chinese family going to the supermarket or something like that. So for me, that's not where the main interest of her story is. And when I looked at the footage of the grandma, the mother who was left behind in the village, she was the really interesting one. She was, going around singing sango and all that. She was she had raised these 6 children single-handedly, and so she was a really interesting character. And so the way that we worked was that Jessie gave me this whole massive material. I asked her to make an assembly or some sort of assembly with somebody else, with notes. And that was with the accent of the children who had gone to Europe. And using that skeleton, it helped me to see behind the scenes, the negative space that I wanted to use. And then, we decided to use the grandmother as the central character, and at that time she actually then supplemented more interviews or more conversation with the grandmother. And also that she wanted it to be some sort of more of an artistic documentary, so she had all kinds of different formats of material, like Super 8 or motion graphics and so on. So it was very exciting to be doing like an artist documentary kind of thing. So that's, again, is that kind of working, is that she entrusted me with all these different kinds of material, and it was like a tapestry that I would start to put together. So it really involves a lot of trust between the director and myself. So, and then of course, I wanted to make a prologue. So this is the prologue for Flowing Stories. I think that you can tell from these 3 prologues that I'm very slow in editing documentary films. It's something that is like the exact opposite of editing a television documentary on order kind of thing, that you finish the thing in 4 weeks, or I mean, that's already long for Hong Kong, but these are really, like, you know, labor of love. You know, you just really do it. You have to really do it for a long time and think about it and try to find inspiration, and that also, that I remember showing some things like this. I don't remember where, but somebody in the audience said that it's very European, and that they would never be allowed to do that in. But I don't remember whether it was I don't remember whether it was in Hong Kong or in the States, because everything is so fast. But I like to, and I think that I'm not the only one, to take the time. I think that you should take the time to tell your story, and take the time that it needs to set the mood and to tell it beautifully. So yeah, I mean, otherwise there are always also interesting television documentaries to edit, but that's not the kind of documentaries here. So let's go into yeah, sure.
For these prologues, are they sketches for you and the director, or are they the actual beginnings of the film? I'm just trying to figure out, like, how do you...
They are the actual beginnings of the film.
Yeah, because obviously with the credits.
Yeah, because in fact, it's like a sort of abstract thinking. I do these prologues before, then I go into the rest of the film, sometimes in a more kind of conventional way. But it's once these prologues are in place, that for me, that I have created them, then I get like into the mood for the rest of the film.
So they just kind of flow into the rest of the film.
Yeah.
And how do you approach the prologue? Because obviously you have a lot of hours of footage. Are you, I guess in terms of technique, are you using paper and computer to kind of sketch out the different, like, Post-its, or everything is on the...
Yeah, it's an interesting question, because like I'm actually right now I'm editing. I've just finished the first draft of this, again, huge, a lot of footage. I mean, documentary from South Africa of a young woman director, and the subject is actually something between Africa and Asia, and so it was actually a production company that is half of part of the production team is in South Africa, part is in Sweden, and we got the ITFA fund and so on. So I thought, oh wow, well, I better be serious about this. So I actually went out and bought myself this one big blackboard, kind of paper board, in my new place, and I bought a whole bunch of Post-its and stuff, and bought 2 other monitors and stuff, and but just before that, I mean, I've been moving, so I just hooked up this with my other monitor, and now we finished the first cut, and I haven't unwrapped the second monitor or I haven't posted any one Post-it. I actually don't use the Post-it. I know that, I mean, I've done that with the apology that you're going to see tomorrow, that we edited at the National Film Board of Canada, and there were a lot of Post-its on the wall, but it was not my Post-its. I tried at one point to do some sort of Excel things, move things around in Excel, then I got very frustrated with that. So And I think that it's really intuitive. I mean, it's like it's something that, for example, the Do I Being one, I knew that I wanted some rural, some sort of farm images, and I wanted several 4 or 5 fixed shots, something very much in the Do I Being style, but very much in the countryside. And when we found the one with the slogan, it was even better, but because it's a Do I Being theme, and that's it. And then with those few shots, I lined them together, and then we changed the lengths and the thing, and that's it. With the fish story, just like I said, it just came about because I saw this poem that the little kid was reciting in the middle of the film, and I knew that it had to go in the beginning. And I knew that I wanted to have the city going all the way until to his room. For this, actually, again, this is also the same story, because I wanted to, I suggested to Jesse, again, as a point of view of a almost foreigner in Hong Kong. As a foreigner, I wouldn't have known that there are rural villages in Hong Kong that people live in. So I thought, well, how are we going to tell this? I think that it would be nice to have the story told from the most cliche view of Hong Kong from the peak, you know, of all the tall buildings and stuff, and then you gradually go into the village, and you situate where it is going. And we tried to do, we thought about doing it with animation, or with animation. It didn't work out, so I just tried it with dissolves, and it works beautifully. And then she gave me so much material in terms of the little bits of Super 8 and stuff that I just wanted to put them together in a sort of poetic way. And it's very, very intuitive. It's, when it's, that's why I always say that for me, editing, or I shouldn't say editing, this is for me more like composing something. When you put different elements together, and it's really like writing a film, just like doing a painting. And yeah.
I guess, you know, it seems kind of overwhelming to think about story when you have so much footage. Like, are you looking at everything, like everything that's shot? No.
No, I know. I know that, you know, people say, really? You know, she doesn't look at the 2,000 hours of footage. No. The director would already do a selection. I asked always the director to come or send me a selection, and then from that selection, I would go into a lot more selections, because from that selection, for example, Lina Yang, who came to do a film about an orphanage in Qingdao that she filmed for over 12 years, and many characters. I asked her to come with about 30 to 40 hours of rushes, and she came with like 5 times that much, of course. But again, like that was first deciding which characters should be in the film, as there were so many. And then when we have narrowed it down to 5 or 6, then I look at her selections, and then I would ask, that's what I do all the time, then I would ask the director or the assistant of the director to say, okay, now for this, I would like to know whether you have more of this kind and that kind and stuff, and where I can look. And then I would just look for days and days and days of the surrounding rushes. So I wouldn't look at the 2,000 hours, no. And, yeah, and then to answer the question about, how do you find the story in terms of this masses of material, which is one thing that we have been doing in the workshop today, is that quite often first of all, like sometimes you have to even select your main characters because you don't, like flowing stories, the main characters for Jessie in the beginning was not this old lady with the children. And I really thought that this lady is the trunk of the tree, and that all the children were like branches, and that the other thing is that then once you decide on the characters, once you really think out which is your important character, then you have to start pulling that thread and see whether you can tell a story there. And sometimes it's quite scary because, I think that everybody who's done documentaries can tell scary stories. Because in the last few years, I not only, I think that a lot of people like me, because when you love independent documentaries, you start sort of doing the production side as well. You start trying to find them funding, you start to try to hook them up with local producers and try to find them festivals after it's finished, and maybe contact distributors and all kinds of stuff that not just editing the film. So for the last Du Ai Bing film, which is still A Young Patriot, still in Siu, it was very, very scary because he had been filming for 5-6 years. And since even before he started filming, we had already talked about he had, been very enthusiastic about this concept and stuff. We changed a lot since then. And he decided to, one of the 3 parts of the story was about this young man whom he found in Pingyao waving a flag. And so he followed this boy around, and I was supposed to set up a French co-production. And for first year, I look at the rushes, and well, what do you have there? There's no story. The second year, no story. Third year, no story. Meanwhile, he's like talking about all these other ideas that goes around it, interviewing people in the streets, interviewing French intellectuals. None of those can really be a film. And it was only, I think, that after 3.5 years, when the young man went to university, he went up to the mountains with his, I don't know how many of you have seen the film, with his fellow classmates in this very, very remote village up in Sichuan, where you have to walk up another 2 hours after the bus and the truck and the stuff, to teach little bare-feet children for the summer. When he came back with that footage, I said, we have a film, and finally we have a film. This is the 4th year. And so he might have been, he might have been following the wrong guy all these 4 years. And then what do we do? Yeah, it's and that's what I mean by sometimes that it's always like a miracle. It's somehow, I'm sure that there are horror stories, but somehow that you have to also trust the instinct maybe of the director. Probably Du Ai Bing didn't choose this guy for nothing. He probably had, a sense that there's a story there, but you don't know how many years it would take before the story comes out. So, yeah. So let's keep going. I wanted to show you. Okay. I want to show just one more prologue before we go on to something else, because I was talking about television documentaries. So the thing is that all these are sort of like artist documentaries. So you might be saying that, okay, we can't do that with television documentaries, but yes, you can. So at least in France you can. So this is a French television documentary, if I can find it. Let's see if I find it. And it was a film that we made for Arte, and with a French-Polish woman director about a Polish journalist, very famous, who died, Kapuczynski, and he was a specialist of Africa, his year in Africa. There are no subtitles to this clip, but I'm sure some of you can understand. But now this is for Arte, so it's television. So, but we were able to do what we liked, which is a prologue. This Kapuczynski was a journalist, a writer, but writing in a very poetic way. So this is the prologue to, it's a film called Kapuczynski's Africa, and it was his text about Africa. So I just show this, it's very short, and then we can go on to something else. Okay. Let me just show you what I just wanted to, I will just show you why I showed you this. First of all, the lady went to, the director went to Warsaw, because it was the anniversary of the death of Kapuczynski. So the day that she went there on her own money, because there was a problem with the production. And anyway, she didn't, then it fell on this weekend of beautiful snow. So again, a minor miracle kind of thing. And so she went on his tomb on his anniversary, and this happens also that it also happens to be a writer that I loved very much when I was doing a lot of work and research in Africa, and now you will hear that. Okay, so this is a contemporary Polish composer. And this was a piece of music that we fought for a long time, because the producing house did not want to do this. Did not somehow didn't think that it fit. They thought of more conventional music and so on, and Olga was like really intent on using, and I was very enthusiastic to do this, because you are contrasting all this thing about what you think of traditionally as Africa. You don't use also all this cheesy African music. You don't use cheesy Polish music, but this is kind of very contemporary stuff. And then because his texts were very, very poetic, so we sort of were able to compose the whole thing in terms of using the image and the text.
J'ai vécu en Afrique pendant des années.
And in fact, every word.
J'y suis allé pour la première fois en 1957. Puis, durant 40 années, j'ai sillonné le continent, en évitant les itinéraires officiels, les palais, les hommes importants.
So again, I would say that this is like we're working a television documentary like an artist documentary, really. And within the framework of a very limited time of editing for television documentary, in fact, both of us would go until 2 or 3 in the morning kind of thing in the editing room. And so it's really a matter of, it's not a matter of what they let you or don't let you do, but it's like what you are trying to, with the passion that you put into it. And then actually this is about, because the whole film came about because this young woman director, she actually she was in possession of the very last interview with Kapuscinski. 2 weeks later, he died. So that's how we got this.
Disparaîtra peu de temps après notre rencontre. Ce film est le récit de sa dernière interview.
So how do we get? We wanted to set up the interview. So we had this. So we had this situation where the Kapuscinski was sitting with the journalist, and and this is Olga, who comes to put on her camera and
cassette 1, deuxième.
And do the interview, because we had to establish that Olga, because it's going to be at the end as well, that Olga was doing the last interview. However, this is fake. She has the same sweater, and I asked her if she was willing to do that. She said, "Yeah, sure." And so we filmed it in the library, and that's it.
Oui. Oui. Cassette 1, deuxième.
And now I'll show you the end of this film. So we had a lot. I mean, we had a hell of a time, but we also had a lot of fun with this one. It's just that I want to show you that it's not just in artist situations that we can try to impose and do what we feel like is more poetic or artistic. Okay, so in her rushes, there was a piece where she said, "Oh, I love this piece, but I don't know how to use it." And it was like it was Kapuscinski, who was by then a very, very old man. He signed her book for her, and they had a little chat, and they took a picture together and all that. And it's so cheesy that she said, "Oh, I only keep it for my kids," kind of thing. I said, "No, I really want to use it for the end." So so this is what we did. Any questions before we go into something maybe more serious? Yeah.
I actually wanted to know more about how you as an editor contribute to like working with the music. And a few of the examples you showed, it seemed obvious that you were, cutting to the beat. So maybe the music was already there. So how are you involved with like integrating the music, I guess?
Well, for example, in the Following Stories, in Jesse John's film, we were very lucky to have, she was very fortunate to be working with one of Naomi Kawase's composer, agreed to make her music. And so he sent us a guide track before I even started when I was already editing. So, and then his music for Flowing Stories really inspired me a lot for the composing of the image and the sound. So that was very instrumental. That was very, very essential in the way that film was put together with his music, really. Otherwise, we work with guide tracks. Quite often, we try not to work with commercial guide tracks, because once you get used to the commercial guide tracks, it's very, very difficult to get rid of that in your head. But quite often that comes back to, that's good too, it comes back to something that I wanted to talk about. It comes back to something that I like to point out, is that when I'm working with a scene or something like that, I quite often I say that try to go with it, try to find the internal music of a scene. It's even of a shot, because when we talk about rhythm, we're not talking about music that you put on afterwards. We're talking about even inside a shot, just start to look about what is going on in the frame, like, you know, who is going, then at this point somebody's walking across the frame and somebody's coming this way, somebody's doing this and stuff. I think every shot has an internal rhythm, and the scene has an internal rhythm, and I think that it's really by fixing, by determining what is the internal rhythm that you editing is really all rhythm, so you really can do something with the scene. And I think that sometimes when we feel that the scene is not right, it's because it's not that the contents are not right, but that the rhythm is not right. And a lot of the times, that another thing that I insist on is that try to alternate your rhythm, because I have had in fiction, mostly in fiction, some people would say that, oh, can we make a film that would go and to these big festivals like Venice or something? You know, there's somebody has even said to me once, you know, you have to just put in some very slow scenes in the middle, and they will go to Venice. Yeah, well, yeah, and yeah, well, I think that you can put in some very slow scenes, but then I always say that to then put in a very, very quick, you know, like a montage or something, you know, very quick thing, then it would contrast. And we're working with that today. I don't know whether he's there. To have something contrast, you know, just try to do contrast all the time. Like, you know, when you have a scene that is full of sound, a lot of noise and stuff, just do a sharp cut, a clean cut. Don't mess around with fading out the sound and stuff. Just do a clean cut, and the next scene is like almost no sound. Then it's the most effective. Just always do something that is very sharp, clean, and surprising. I mean, that surprised even yourself, kind of thing. And yeah, I think a lot of the times especially when we start out, we just try to, you know, people like to do dissolves and, you know, dissolve the images and dissolve the sounds and stuff. There are ways to do dissolves, the sound dissolves, especially when you have two scenes together that you're, like, in fact, we were also working on that today, that two scenes that don't cut together, but that they are different time and space, for example. One of the very, then somehow people, especially when they don't know what to do, would put in a cutaway in the middle or a transition shot or something. I would say just put the two scenes together and do a sound, you know, fade out on the sound on one end and fade it up on the other, and work on the sound. I think that's most. And so sound and rhythm and music is really one of the most important things in editing. And another trick that, but I have never managed to find an example of this trick. I talk about it every time. Is that I always say that when I have two shots that, when you have two shots that don't cut together, and people would say, oh, these two shots don't cut together. Just cut them together and put a sound on the cut whether it's a dog barking. I love dogs barking. And I have a collection of birds, so and especially crows. You just say, put a crow there, and far away motorcycles. That works very well too, and it would work every time. Okay. In terms of that's it for the prologues. But tomorrow, since we are showing the apology, which is this documentary that I cut in Canada, which is about 3 comfort women stories in 3 countries. There is also a prologue there that is very, very wonderful. We still have a little bit of time, so let's go on. Okay, so let's keep going to. Just want to do with, since we are in the question of rhythm and stuff. Let's just get into sort of rhythm and there it is, rhythm and the internal music in a sequence. There you go. It's about trying to build a scene and what you do with rhythm. So I want to show something that I think that you've all seen. Last Train Home. Not the beginning, but I'll show you this scene and then we can walk through it. Another thing that I like to do very much is if you have some sort of action. Instead of waiting for the action to finish, just cut in the middle of it. Especially to a contrasting scene, like a quiet scene or something like that, which would be much more effective than if you let the, because we're always doing things like in film school, we're told to do the establishing shot and all this kind of stuff, and then we're told to do, we're trained to do, people walk into frame, people walk out of frame, and stuff, and actually. I love doing, and in fact, most of the films that I edit, the person is already in the frame a little bit when they hardly ever walk into a frame, and sometimes I let them out of frame, but they pause quite often already a little bit, like on the side of the frame, and you will find that it's much more dynamic. It just makes the transition. It just really makes the transition much more dynamic, and so that was really the way that it was built. It was that I wanted to keep the fight going as long as possible, and there was a little bit more actually. The fight went on for a little bit more. And this is, again, maybe sometimes I get asked a lot the question of the relationship between director and editor. And I think a lot of times it's a matter of negotiation. Sometimes it's total trust, like Jesse and myself kind of thing. But sometimes it's a matter of negotiation. And sometimes it's like I quite often say that the editor is the director's psychoanalyst, a psychotherapist, because a lot of times it's what the director doesn't dare to say or that are suppressed, that he is relying on the editor to say it, to bring it out, and then, well, I didn't say it, it's the editor who put it in. Yeah, but in the case of there's a lot of self-censorship with directors, and so it's in that case sometimes it's a matter of negotiation as well, because in this case I was able to get Li Xing to agree to prolonging the fight and using the mic in the fight and so on. But there is a certain point I would have liked to prolong it even more, because there are other things that happens after. But that's as far as he could go. And we have to understand that even if we act as a psychotherapist during the process of the film, finally it's the director, the filmmaker, who has to live with the film all his life. So I think there is a certain point beyond which that they can't go, and that we have to respect, I think. So that was that. That was the. So I would say not to hesitate to cut out any kind of anything that is too much. I mean, I think that really comes from the fact that I come from drama. So in fact, I'm cutting this like a fiction film, and that I don't think that you need to see them setting up the table or cooking. Okay. Well, obviously we never have time to cover all the grounds, but I would still like to show you very quickly some stuff about the mixing techniques. So I'd like to show you Yang Lina's film about orphanage in the thing that she shot over 12 years with a lot of characters. So these little kids that were disabled orphans, she just saw them growing up until they were young men. And so that film was like we eventually made it into a French co-production, but it was very, very difficult to structure because there are several characters and they are different ages. There are little kids, young boys, and then young men. So it's a matter of also, so there's no way to tell the story in a linear fashion. It has to be more experimental. So I was able to be freer, and then we also, it was also for Arte and for a slot at night that allowed a lot more freedom. So we were able to I was able to put in a lot more experimentation. Let me see what we have here. Okay. Okay, I don't. Okay. Again, this is a clip that. Okay, these are the young men now. They're still, very good friends, and they are going back to the old building of the orphanage when they were growing up that we saw in the film in the beginning of the film. Now, Lina Young, she shot some scenes in that old building when the kids were just little kids, and she said, "Oh, we can't use this because they are badly shot." just look. We'll see what can be done with censored clips. I mean, we even saved on money on special effects. So, yeah, I thought this was so perfect. Even the echo in the, so yeah. So this is like a self-censored things, and then another mixed technique thing is also in this film, and yeah. Yeah. Yes?
The overexposed shots, they're the same boys, but just several
Much younger,
years
like
before.
yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And that she actually, she shot them like that, and that she thought that we would never be able to use them. Okay, this is this is another sequence where I would just imagine that this is the main character, because this is how I started the film. If I have it somewhere, I will show you how I started the film. And this is one of the key scenes where he talks about how he actually eventually went back to look for his birth mother. And well, I just decided to, instead of doing, because it's it was a very long story, so we could have done a sort of classical, just jump cutting, just using what I wanted to tell us, but I thought we could just play with it. Okay, that's pretty straightforward. It's just a matter of compressing time with different dissolves in a different sort of way of different images, so that we didn't have to do the kind of thing. Well, it's a little bit after 9. Maybe we could take some questions while I maybe prepare one last clip. Yeah.
Just a quick question regarding the amount of. This question is regarding the amount of rushes you get from the directors. Do the directors not typically have a very clear idea of the structure of the film they want to make before they go into production?
In documentary?
Well, yeah, in documentary.
No. You're talking about so many different kinds of documentaries. Like I've done television documentaries where there are straight scripts, even so that the transitions and the way that the different things are composed are still completely open to interpretation. But that the structure was in place because it's scripted. But most of these most of these documentaries, no. This kind of documentary, you don't even know where the story is. Sometimes you don't even. Du Haibing was following this young patriot for 6 years. He only knows that, the guy, for the story part, he's going to be the main character. But his idea for a structure, when he started the concept, and when he was talking to me, we were discussing about it, was rather that there was a part of a play that he was going to write, and it was about patriotism, and there was another part which would be discussions between expats in China and expats elsewhere, that we will talk about this patriotism, and then the third part would be this young boy. So no, when it was then very quickly we realized that it was only going to be about this young boy, and that there is actually something else. Actually, eventually in that structure, something else came into it, because he shot all over China the exhibitions and dances and songs and festivals about patriotic songs and so on. So I dropped that all over the film as a kind of like transitions, like transitional scenes. But in fact, it was also very, it made sense, because we're documenting the life and the transformation of this young patriot. And this is the context in which he lives. This is the country. and the atmosphere in which he lives. So it makes sense. It's not just something dropped in there. But no, this kind of documentary, the structure is not there in the first place. You were talking about the scripted documentaries. Yeah.
Got it.
One fast question too. I realize that if we're doing commercial things, when we usually in such a long scene or whatever, we tend to throw in some music like suspense, mood music or whatever to tack in the shot, that we don't allow such a long time for the space to carry. Is it a documentary practice to make it real, that you don't throw in any music?
No, I use music. I use music, but I hate using a lot of music. In fiction and in documentaries, and in documentaries especially, but even in fiction, I tend to compose with sounds, like with natural sounds, and try to make something like crows, and try to make something more atmospheric. And in terms of music, I think that the less music we use, the better. Although that sometimes it's not what we wish for, especially when it's not. Well, sometimes it doesn't happen that way. But anyway, that's another story. Yeah.
Hi, I'm just wondering how could the director to avoid self-censoring, especially when he is also the editor of the film, which is basically the case for all the students. Because I'm shooting a graduation documentary for myself. I'm a journalism student, and basically the shooting, the editing, and also the directing to working out the flow, the so-called flow of the documentary is basically all on my own. So I have to, the 3 columns, the writings, the understanding of the film, and then videos, and then audio, and then visuals, which is basically really static. So how to avoid such?
Well, we were working on that today, actually, with the workshop. And for one of the very simple manifestation of that is like there was, for example, this very powerful emotional scene in this one of the films today, and the way that the sound was handled, it showed me that the director, because let's put it this way: if the sound was handled differently, like with a very sharp cut, very radical cut, and goes into some complete silence and another radical cut out, it's very powerful, and it's sort of very emotional. So there was a different handling of the sound in his version, which shows me that he's afraid to go there. He's not ready to go there. There are 2 reasons for this. Every time there's a self-censoring thing, there's always these 2 reasons. One is that he's afraid of how he would react. He's afraid of this too much of the emotional impact on himself. Secondly, something like that is like very emotionally, has a big emotional impact, and I think that perhaps it's slightly better in Europe, but definitely in Anglo countries, in America, in Canada, in Hong Kong, so on, there is this fear of being, like laughed at, like so the Anglo culture, you don't go to, you might be called too sentimental, too cheesy, to this and that, why are the European films so emotional? It's because it's a different culture. So I think that's what I mean by self-censoring. I'm not talking about not showing certain images, but I'm talking about the way that you communicate emotion. Two more. Maybe there's no more. Who else? Hi.
When do you think an editor should become involved in a project?
When?
When?
It depends on what kind of editor. I'm involved. I asked to be involved before. It's even before at the very beginning. Yeah, I asked to be involved. I usually I'm involved in the beginning because I'm most of the time good friends with the people I'm working with, and that so when the story is happening, when the idea is starting, I already know about it. So because sometimes I start also trying to raise funds and stuff, and and other times, like for this South African documentary now, I am on board only after the director herself has made like many cuts, because it's all out of also financial reasons, so economical reasons. Yeah.
So in that collaboration, just how much creative input, or how much do you suggest to a director? As in, do you discuss which character you think is it's worthwhile to follow? Do you suggest materials that the director should? Do you think from the post-production point of view?
Well, this was particularly interesting. Is that she again sent over a huge drive to Paris, and she prepared everything very carefully. No assistant. I also had no assistant on my end, and she was sending me stuff by Dropbox, and then this huge drive arrived, and the fact is that like I was called on board because the last few cuts, the best efforts that she could make, she realized that she couldn't make it. She's very much aware of that fact, and that she is reaching out to get a good editor on board, kind of thing, and she's seen Last Train Home and so on. So then, and so she basically again, give me the whole material, but also her rough cuts, and what I did was, there was a much more journalistic approach. She had a much more journalistic approach. And it was not a matter of self-censoring. It was a matter of, she didn't know how to round out the characters more. And the secondary characters, she didn't think, like for example, one of the characters it's about orphans again, but that went to the funeral of his father, and she actually she put it aside because she didn't know how to do it. And even in the first cut, the first hour that I made, she said that she was still not comfortable with it. And I said that, no, it's important for later on in my second part, because it's going to echo something that I've laid the groundwork for in the second part. So she left it in, and then now that she has the two parts, she understands exactly what I've been trying to do, and that she's actually very happy with it. She said, we've achieved everything that we set out to do. And now when I go back, actually, we'll do a fine cut. But basically what I was doing was like, bringing out everything that were there, but that she didn't know how to use, and that it was a much. It's a very rich story, so it was a pity to have just a skeleton of like journalistic report of what's happening, but that it could be a very rich story. And in that case, she really just sent the drive over, and the Swedish producer and herself never saw a cut until like 2 days before I left for Hong Kong, until I finished the whole cut. They just had blind trust, and also for the fact that she was about to give birth to her first baby, and she actually, the baby held on, the baby came the day after she saw the first cut. Yeah, sure.
So in one of the clips you show us of the Hoxian Bin Chun, I noticed that there's a change of person's narration, like from the third person's narration to a first person's narration. I wonder what are the factors that affect you to change, to use different kinds of person's narration, and what kinds of things that we should be careful of once we apply this kind of technique?
In fact, that narration is herself. It's the director, and it wasn't a third-person narration. It was really a first-person narration. She said, Grandma Lau, she used to live next door to us, and that whenever whenever they went to Europe, they would bring back. So it was the only narration in that film was her, and it's a first-person narration talking about her neighbors, talking about this family that we're describing. And most of the time, I try to ask the directors to be very careful about first-person narrations, because it's very difficult for it to work well. But in this case, it works well because I also wanted to use images of Jessie in the film. For example, that scene where the grandma had these baskets, which is the way that we staged artistically this kind of thing, and then this was like just an outtake of her playing around and putting it on Jessie's shoulders. And I thought that is such a precious scene because it says with the whole. Also, there's a whole theme of transmission from an older lady to a younger woman. Yeah, and so yeah.
Actually, my question was very similar, coincidentally. Okay. But it was So if you're working with a director who really does want to add voiceover, I've noticed in the edits you've shown, it's pre-existing audio that has been worked with the edit. But what if, like, when it's voiceover and it's got to be there, do they add it afterwards? Do you have to do they watch it and then write it based on that cut, or do they give it to you beforehand? How does that
They can work? Do both. I mean, they can do both. Some of them have the concept of already something that's like a voiceover, and usually we would work with that. I would work with that because it would be a sort of skeleton, and that it always has to be rewritten. I mean, after the film is edited, the voiceover always has to be redone. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Most of it was on.
Try to give it to the.
Hi. Have you ever encountered situations where, or how should I say, where the director gives you a set of footages and you realize it's impossible to do what he's intending to do or what you want to do? Like, basically, I'm saying he may be a decent director, but the cameraman didn't shoot anything that would be helpful to that scene.
Usually it's the director himself or herself shooting. So Yeah, I have used very dirty words many times in the editing room. Yes, yeah, cursing the person who's like. That is it's a funny thing that we were talking about that with Kirsten the other night. Saying that quite often I would curse the camera person because again, quite often it's a case of maybe financial reasons, and that maybe it's the director himself, herself, whatever, holding the camera, and sometimes it's a friend, you know, and the general problem is that whenever it's like that, like a real good camera person knows when to hold it and not panic when his subject or her subject moves away. But you know, you have this, or you know, they could move the camera, but that you still have enough afterwards to cut. Whereas somebody who's like panicky would move there and like move there and move there and move there, and I've had a lot of those, and there are tricks to that. There are tricks to that. You can replace them, like the last clip that I did with the young boy, then talking about his birth mother, and you just. The ways to do it in a sort of more experimental way, to use a different shot or whatever. And there are also ways to do it to just change the speed a little bit, reframe, stuff like that. But sometimes you can't do much. Sometimes you just have to, and always I think that it's a lot of times just think in terms of, I think a lot of editors don't, especially in documentaries, they don't think in terms of a separation of image and sound. I mean, each clip that I see, I'm thinking of it as an image and a sound. So I may be using the sound completely differently.
I see, thanks.
I just wanted to say that most of the clips that I showed, that they are available on DVDs.
So let's give Mary Stephen another round of applause.